The Alpha King handed me divorce, papers at my baby shower, but I wasn't the one betraying him. A true story. There are moments in life that split everything in two, the before and the after. For Nadia, that moment came on a Saturday morning, in a room full of pink ribbons, flower arrangements, and people who loved her. It came wrapped in silence, in a sealed envelope, placed on the gift table next to a teddy bear someone had brought for the baby. It came from the hands of the man she had given 7 years of her life to, her husband, her king. Nadia was 31 years old, she was 7 months pregnant, and she had done nothing wrong. But let's go back a little. Because this story doesn't start in that room. It starts the way most painful stories do. Slowly, quietly, with things that felt too small to notice at the time. Nadia had met King Calum when she was 24. She was not from a powerful family. She was not the obvious choice for a king. She was the daughter of a border family. Decent people, honest people, and she had grown up understanding that life required work, patience, and a certain willingness to be underestimated. When Calum chose her as his mate, the entire court was surprised. When she moved into the palace, some of them never quite stopped being surprised. She felt it in the way people looked at her during dinners, in the way conversations would shift slightly when she walked into a room. But Calum had never made her feel that way. Not in the beginning. In the beginning, he was everything. He was steady where she was nervous, warm where the palace was cold, and he had this way of looking at her, like she was the most obvious answer to a question he had been asking for years. She loved him in the way young women love, when they don't yet know how dangerous it is to love someone so completely, with her whole chest, no part of herself held back. 3 years into the marriage, things began to shift. Not dramatically, not in ways she could point to and say, "There, that is the moment." It was quieter than that. Calum started coming home later. He started trusting the opinions of his court advisors more than her observations. He became harder to reach, not physically, but in that invisible way where someone is sitting right next to you, and you still feel a distance you cannot name. Nadia told herself it was the pressure of leadership. She told herself that kings carry weight that ordinary people cannot fully see. She told herself, again and again, to be patient. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that someone was helping that distance grow. Lady Soraya had been part of the court for as long as anyone could remember. She was elegant, composed, and the kind of woman who made everyone feel like they were in good hands. She had known Calum since they were teenagers. She was, by all appearances, a loyal friend of the crown. What she actually was, what she had been for years, patiently, methodically, was a woman building a case. Not through argument or confrontation, but through something far more dangerous: suggestion. A quiet word here, a concerned expression there, a carefully placed doubt, delivered so gently that by the time Calum felt uncertain, he had already forgotten where the uncertainty started. Soraya had wanted Calum for herself. Not the love of him exactly, more the position of being beside him, the power of it, the history of it. And Nadia, simply by existing, was in the way. When Nadia became pregnant, something changed in Soraya's calculations. A child meant permanence. A child meant that even if Calum ever moved away from Nadia emotionally, there would always be a connection. So Soraya did something she had been building toward for 3 years. She made her move. She produced letters. Forged, every single one of them, but written so carefully, in ink that aged correctly, with details plucked from real conversations and real events, that they looked completely genuine. Letters that suggested Nadia had been meeting secretly with a rival alpha. Letters that hinted at a relationship that had nothing to do with politics. She found a court scribe who owed her a favor and pressed him to backdate documents. She arranged for 2 witnesses to corroborate a story about a meeting they had never actually seen. She built, piece by piece, a lie so detailed and so cold that it would have taken a very careful, very patient person to unravel it. Calum was not, in that moment, patient. He was a man who had already been softened up by 3 years of gentle doubt. And when the evidence was placed in front of him, something in him did not want to ask questions. Maybe because asking questions meant sitting with uncertainty. Maybe because it was easier to feel betrayed than to feel confused. Whatever the reason, he looked at the letters, looked at the witnesses, listened to Soraya's quiet, sympathetic voice, and he believed it. He signed the divorce papers on a Friday night. He did not call Nadia. He did not confront her privately, or sit across from her and ask for an explanation. He signed them, stamped them with the royal seal, and gave them to a palace official with instructions for the following morning. The following morning was the baby shower. Nadia had been awake since dawn that morning, too excited to sleep. She had spent weeks quietly looking forward to this day, not because of the gifts or the attention, but because it meant the baby was almost real, almost here. She stood in front of the mirror before heading downstairs and pressed both hands against her stomach and felt the small, steady movement inside her, and thought, we made it this far. The hall was beautiful, white flowers everywhere, pale morning light coming through the tall windows. Her closest friends were there, a few noble ladies who had been kind to her over the years, her grandmother Marin who had traveled 3 days to be present. There was soft music and warm food, and the gentle, excited hum of women gathered around something good. Nadia noticed Soraya early. She was standing near the side entrance, dressed impeccably, with an expression on her face that Nadia had never quite been able to read. But she noticed it, and then let it go, the way she had trained herself to let things go when there was no clear reason to hold them. When Calum walked in, the room went quiet, the way rooms do when a king enters. It was automatic, a shift in the air, everyone straightening slightly. Nadia turned to look at him with a smile already on her face. The smile didn't last long. He walked directly to her. Not to greet her, not to join the celebration. He walked with the specific, deliberate energy of someone who has already made a decision and is simply there to deliver it. He placed the envelope on the gift table. He looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes that she didn't know how to name. Then it was gone. He spoke quietly. He said he had seen the letters. He said he knew about the meetings. He said the marriage was over, that the papers were signed, and that she should be out of the palace by sundown. The room was so still that Nadia could hear her own heartbeat. She did not cry. She wanted to. There was a wave rising somewhere inside her chest that felt enormous, but she did not let it come. Not there. Not in front of all those eyes. Not in front of Soraya, who was standing in the doorway with an expression of such perfectly crafted sadness that Nadia felt something shift inside her. Not grief. Something colder. Clarity. She looked at her husband. She looked at him for a long moment and she said, "You have made a mistake. I hope you figure that out before it's too late." Then she picked up the envelope from the gift table, held it in both hands and walked out of the hall. Slowly, deliberately, every step chosen. She did not look back once. Her grandmother Marin found her 20 minutes later in the east corridor, sitting on a bench with the envelope in her lap, and both hands still pressed to her stomach. Marin didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside her. That was enough. They left the palace that same evening. Marin took Nadia to a small village called Ashfen, near the eastern border. It was the kind of place where people knew each other's names, and nobody cared about palace politics. The cottage they stayed in was small and a little cold in the mornings, and the walls were thin enough that you could hear the wind at night. Nadia cried for the first 3 days. Properly cried. The kind where you're not even sure what you're crying for anymore because the grief has become too large to have a specific shape. She cried for the marriage she thought she had, for the version of Calum she had believed in, for the child who would be born into this mess, for herself, at 24, who had loved so completely and had no idea what was being built around her while she slept. And then, on the 4th morning, she woke up before sunrise and made herself tea and sat by the window and looked at the fields outside and thought, okay, what do I actually know? What she knew was that she had never met with any rival alpha. What she knew was that the letters were lies. What she knew was that someone had wanted this, wanted her out, wanted her gone, wanted the king to believe the worst about her before she had a single chance to speak. And what she had been in that palace for 3 years gave her something most people in her position would not have had: knowledge. She knew where things were kept. She knew which servants had seen which things. She knew that paper trails existed in palace archives that most people never thought to look at. She started writing letters of her own, carefully, to people she trusted, asking quiet, specific questions, not demanding, just asking. While Nadia was building her case in Ashfen, things back at the palace were not going the way Soraya had hoped. A king without his queen turns out to be a difficult thing to manage. Calum grew withdrawn. The warmth that Nadia had always brought to court gatherings was simply gone, and the absence of it showed in ways nobody had anticipated. People were quieter. Dinners felt heavy. And Calum himself, though nobody dared say it to his face, looked like a man who had done something he was already beginning to regret, but was too proud to admit. His beta, a man named Rael who had served beside him for 12 years, was watching everything. Rael had never liked Soraya, not specifically, not for any reason he could articulate, but over the weeks following Nadia's exile, something started bothering him. Small inconsistencies. The court scribe who had seemed nervous in the week before the baby shower, a witness whose account, when Rael thought about it carefully, didn't quite match the geography of what they claimed to have seen. A document dated 3 weeks before an event that Rael knew for certain had not yet been arranged at that point. He went to the scribe first, alone, informally, in the way that a man who is not yet accusing anyone goes to check something out. The scribe lasted about 4 minutes before he started crying. He told Rael everything: the pressure Soraya had applied, the favor she had called in, the document he had been asked to alter, and the date he had been told to change it to. He had known it was wrong. He had done it anyway, and the guilt of it had been sitting in his chest like a stone ever since. Rael took the confession to the royal council, not to Calum first, because he knew that the king's pride was already tangled up in what had happened, and going to him directly might trigger defensiveness before the truth had space to land. The council heard everything. They called in the witnesses, under proper questioning, real questioning, not Soraya's carefully managed version. The witnesses' stories started falling apart at the edges. Soraya, when she realized what was happening, tried to leave the palace grounds. She made it as far as the eastern gate. 2 months after the exile, Nadia gave birth in the Ashfen cottage. Her grandmother was there. A midwife from the village was there. The baby came into the world loud and healthy, and immediately demanding attention, which, Marin said, was already a sign of good character. The baby had markings, a rare pattern in the Wolf bloodline that appeared only in direct descendants of the Dravith royal line, Gellam's line. It had not appeared in 300 years. The midwife saw it immediately, and looked up at Marin without a word, and Marin simply said, "Write it down." The midwife wrote it down. 2 village elders signed the record. There was nothing arguable about it. Back in the palace, the council's investigation was reaching its conclusion. Calum was called in to hear the findings. He sat in the council chamber and listened to everything. The forged letters, the paid scribe, the coached witnesses, the timeline that did not hold together once someone actually looked at it carefully, and he did not say a single word throughout. Not one. He just sat there and listened, and the people in the room said later that they had never seen a man look so completely and totally still. When it was over, he stood up. He asked one question. He said, "Where is my wife?" Calum arrived in Ashfen on a gray morning, 3 weeks after the baby was born. He came alone. No royal escort, no formal announcement, no preparation. He came in ordinary clothes, and he knocked on the cottage door like any other person would knock on a door. Nadia opened it herself. She was holding the baby. She looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. He did not make a speech. He did not explain himself or justify himself or tell her what had been discovered, because he understood, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that none of that was what this moment was about. What he did was kneel. In the dirt, on the doorstep of a small village cottage, an alpha king got down on one knee in front of the woman he had wronged, with no audience, no witness except for Marin, who was watching quietly from the window, and he stayed there and did not say anything, because there was genuinely nothing adequate to say. Nadia looked down at him for what felt like a very long time. Then she stepped back from the doorway. She let him in. She did not forgive him, not in that moment, not with those words, not yet. But she let him cross the threshold, and she showed him his daughter, and she watched his face when he saw the markings on the baby's skin, and understood what they meant. And then she placed a folder of documents on the table beside him, the records from the birth, the signed witnesses, her own gathered evidence, and she said, very calmly, "I want you to understand exactly what you chose to believe, and exactly what was actually true." He read everything. He stayed until evening. He left without pushing for anything more. Soraya was formally removed from court. Her title was stripped. She was exiled from the territory. Quietly, without a dramatic public proceeding. because the council decided that making it a spectacle would only give her more attention than she deserved. The scribe who had altered the documents was demoted and placed under supervision. The witnesses lost their positions. The whole structure of the lie was dismantled piece by piece, and when it was done, there was nothing left of it. Nadia returned to the palace 6 weeks later. She did not return as a woman who had been forgiven. She returned as a woman who had negotiated, through Marin's guidance and her own hard-won clarity, terms that protected her independence and her daughter's standing, regardless of what happened next between herself and Calum. She made it clear that she was returning as herself, not as a wife seeking reinstatement, not as someone who would quietly fold herself back into a role that had nearly destroyed her. Whatever came next would be different, or it would not happen at all. Calum accepted every condition she placed. The hardest part, Nadia said later, was not the baby shower. It was not the exile, or the birth alone in a village cottage, or even the months of uncertainty about what the future would hold. The hardest part was the moment she had to decide who she was going to be on the other side of it. Because there were 2 ways to carry what had happened. She could carry it as a wound, the way some people do, letting the bitterness of it shape everything that came after, becoming smaller and harder and more defended. Or she could carry it differently. She chose differently. Not because she forgave easily or forgot quickly. She didn't. But because she looked at her daughter and understood that the child was watching. And what she wanted her daughter to see was not a woman broken by what had been done to her. She wanted her to see a woman who had been through something hard and had come out the other side still standing. Still herself. There is a moment near the end of this story that she has described only once, to her grandmother. She was back in the palace, several months after returning, and she walked through the hall where the baby shower had been held. The room was empty and quiet, completely ordinary, with the afternoon light coming through the windows in long pale strips. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room where everything had fallen apart, and she felt, not anger, not grief, not the particular sting of humiliation, but something she hadn't expected. She felt free. Because she had walked out of that room with nothing. No status, no protection. No one standing up for her. And she had built everything back with her own hands. And that meant it was hers, in a way that it had never quite been before. The palace, the title, the future. Hers. Not because she had been chosen for it. Because she had earned it. She did not survive him. She survived herself.